Minutes late. Okay, I do apologize, folks. Starting just a couple minutes later here than I initially wanted to. First of all, thanks for coming out tonight. Welcome. It's great to be back here at Freaknik for the first time in, gosh, I think about 12 years. Yeah! Woohoo! Yeah! It's great to be back here, folks. My name is Patrick Burns, aka Laughing Boy. Is my motif. I go around the SE2600 circles, and I've been doing Freaknik. Was not here for the first one. I was here for the second one, which I think was 1997-ish. Sounds about right. Yeah. So eight. Okay. So I was for the second one. Yeah. So 19, 20 years. It's been a long time that I've been doing this. Yeah. I used to come on the scene here quite a bit, and I looked forward to coming to Freaknik every year. It was my thing. Yeah, it's great to be back finally here. A little bit about me: Laughing Boy, aka Patrick Burns. Again, been involved with SE2600 since about 1997. Really, my forte, what I'm really best known for in the world outside of geekdom, is I'm a paranormal enthusiast. Ghost hunting, paranormal investigation is sort of my forte. It's kind of ruled my life for about the last 20 years or so. I used to actually star in a TV show on True TV called Haunting Evidence. I was on that episode. What's that?
Can you use lasers?
Can you use lasers? Yes, absolutely. There are actually, they do like a laser grid for paranormal investigation to see if anything goes through and disrupts the laser grid. I've never actually seen it do anything, but they tell me that it works occasionally from time to time. So yeah, I was on this show called Haunting Evidence. It's on True TV. You can still find some episodes of it floating around out there on YouTube and such if you're interested in seeing me in action. I currently reside in Savannah, Georgia, where I continue in the paranormal, but now I get paid to do it. I actually run ghost tours nightly in Savannah, Georgia, and now I've just started my own company this past summer, so the boss can't tell me I can't take off for Freaknik anymore, because I am the boss. So here I am. It's great to be back here. But my real thing in geekdom here in SE2600 is I'm a laser enthusiast or a laser hobbyist. You know, people say, what's your background in lasers? Just a geek, right? I just like playing with lasers. I think that they're incredibly cool. I have ever since I was a little boy, and I've been playing with lasers, laser light display since about 1992 for, I guess, 25 years. Wow, a quarter of a century. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, but it actually has been. Let's go into a little bit about the laser itself. Light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. The whole premise of it, called stimulated emission, I know it sounds dirty, right? I swear it isn't. It deals with photons, not something else. The process by which incoming photon of a specific frequency can interact with an excited atomic electron, sounds dirty still, right, doesn't it? Or other excited molecular state, causing it to drop to a lower energy level. The liberated energy transfers to the electromagnetic field, creating a new photon with a phase, frequency, polarization, and direction that are all identical to the photons of the incident wave. So you get this laser beam going out. Of course, the concept of stimulated emission, proposed way back in 1917 by who else? Albert Einstein, right? So 100 years ago was really when Einstein came up with the whole concept that really is what makes lasers tick. Now, the laser itself was actually predated by a device called the maser, a microwave laser, microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. It predated the laser by about 7 years. It was invented by Charles Towns in 1953. And it was a niche device, never really found widespread applications. They are still used for some certain applications today. They're used for timekeeping devices and atomic clocks. They're also extremely low noise microwave amplifiers that they use in radio telescopes and deep spacecraft communication ground station. I just love the picture of that thing. Look at how science fiction, how badass that thing looks, right? Cool. So don't really see the masers used too often, but they do have some limited niche uses. The optical maser was what they called the laser first when it was proposed. The patent was filed by Bell Labs in 1958. A graduate student named Gordon Gold published a paper called The Laser in 1959 and filed a patent that same year claiming that he had ownership of the device, that he had invented it, and then ensued a 28-year-long patent lawsuit. Eventually, Bell Labs, of course, were the ones that won the patent to the laser, and the rest, as they say, is history. The first laser fired on May 16th, 1960 by Theodore H. Maiman at Bell Labs, and that's a picture of it right over there. It was called a ruby crystal laser. It was a solid-state laser, basically used a bunch of flash lamps to excite this synthetic ruby crystal. The stimulated emission would occur inside the crystal, or what we refer to the resonator. You had a pair of mirrors, a fully reflective mirror on one end of the resonator, and a partially reflective mirror on the other end, allowing some of the light to escape from the polarized laser light coming out, and that's basically how a laser works like that. But these were pulsed devices, like in the order of a couple of nanoseconds. Not very long duration. The constant wave, or CW laser, didn't arrive on the scene until several years later. When the laser first came out, they called it a solution looking for a problem, which was really kind of funny. I mean, obviously physicists, scientists saw the implications of this device, and somebody knew that it was going to have wide-reaching applications, but what? What exactly were you going to use this thing for? And really nobody had any idea in the beginning. They knew that there were going to be applications for this technology sooner or later down the line, and boy, were there ever, right? Like I tell folks, it seems like everything in our lives has been impacted by the laser in some way, shape, or form. In fact, I've got a Google search that I subscribe to, and I get daily updates on laser applications, new applications of laser technology going out there, and it's mind-boggling to trying to keep up with all this. It just seems like it is literally like every other day that somebody's coming out with a new application for laser that nobody thought of before. So really device that certainly has found its problems and definitely is a solution for those. So when did I get into lasers? Well, for me it started about 1992. Now, I'd always been fascinated by lasers ever since I was a little boy. Since I first saw them on television, I thought, oh, how cool, right? Something straight out of Star Wars or science fiction. But not for you, kid. Way too expensive. I had a catalog for, Edmund Scientific at my junior high, and I was flipping through it one day, and I saw that they had a helium neon laser for sale. And I was like, oh, how cool. And then I saw the price tag, and it was about $400 or $500. Okay, so we're talking $400 or $500 back in the early 1980s. Amplify that by cost of living, inflation, everything. Probably would have been, in today's equivalent, about $2,000 or $3,000. Obviously, I'm a little kid. I didn't have that kind of money. So lasers seemed like this far off, distant technology that I would never really ever get my hands on. Well, everything changed on a fateful morning. Back, I think it was January of 1992, I was bored one day. I was hanging out in the local grocery store, and I happened to pick up a copy of Popular Science. And I flipped through it, and I ended up in the classified sections at the back of Popular Science. And there was an ad, a little 1-inch by 1.5-inch ad for a company called, I think it was called Meredith Instruments, based out of Arizona. And they were selling a 1 milliwatt helium neon laser module for the grand sum total of $40, including shipping. Geekgasm, right? I'm like, holy crap, I can get a laser for $40. Immediately ran to the post office, got myself a mail order, a money order. Okay, this is the days before we could do online transactions, right? This is 1992. Sent away for this thing. About a week later, it shows up. Powered by 12 volts DC. I had an electric train transformer that I ended up hooking up to it. Turned it on, boom, lo and behold, there's the red dot on the wall, and sort of changed my life forever at that moment. It was incredibly cool. But what am I going to use it for? Well, I was always really fascinated by lasers used for visual displays, laser light shows, that sort of thing. It was really cool. Fortunately, even though I didn't have a lot of money, that really wasn't a problem. It wasn't an issue back then. Some of the classic laser effects done in laser light shows required no high-tech stuff, no computers, no electronics. Very low tech. Two of the most common, effects that you can do with them, you've probably seen them before. You take the laser, okay, and you bounce it off of two rotating mirrors. These are just two DC motors, okay, offset 90 degrees from one another. You deflect the beam off of one mirror, okay, and these mirrors are offset slightly. They're not perfectly level, so they're offset at a slight angle by a couple of degrees, so that when the mirror rotates, it's wobbling like this, okay? The laser that draws on it, when you bounce it off of just the one, and you look at it up on top of a screen or a projection surface, it's going to project a circle. Well, what happens if you project that circle onto another spinning mirror, right? And you get this interference pattern, you get this laser spirograph type effect, where you can just infinitely change these patterns by changing the speed of the motors, the directions. You speed one up, you slow it down. You can get a really, really amazing array of different types of analog effects using nothing more than a pair of DC motors. Or if you want to get really fancy with it, you can add a third motor. You could put one motor in there that basically has a I guess you call it a spinning aperture, basically to chop the laser into pulses. So you can get a pretty wide-ranging array of effects. The coolest thing that I did actually was even more low-tech than that, is basically to take a speaker cone. And some people, they'll put like a piece of latex over the speaker cone and then they glue mirrors onto it. I found that if you cut away the speaker cone, leaving just the coil, and you glue a spring onto that speaker cone with a mirror on the end of that spring, that the effect is much, much more pronounced, and you can really get the laser swinging all over the room, making these fantastic patterns, just scanning everywhere, completely random. And yeah, I had a lot of fun in my bedroom playing around with that, 25 years ago. And then there's another effect that you can do. It's called a Lumia effect, which basically all you do is you pass your laser through a piece of distorted glass. Some people use shower glass you would find in a shower, with a rippled surface on it. Or you could take like a clear CD here in this instance. It looks like they put like some clear epoxy on there. They just swirled it around into random patterns. And then you put it on a slow rotating DC motor, slow RPM DC motor, like a clock motor, and you basically pass the laser beams through it. And as the laser beams pass through, the uneven surface of the glass basically distorts the beam, and it makes it do really trippy, hippie, swirly patterns. Another very, very low-tech effect that you can do with it. And that's about it. There are other things that you can do. You could get, for example, a diffraction grating, which will split the beam into multiple beams. You probably know what I'm talking about in that regard. So you can split it out into different, with a diffraction grating, split it out into a bunch of different beams and basically combine these effects together. So you've got a handful of different effects that you can do with lasers to get some pretty patterns. But they're kind of limited, right? They're kind of limited. To get into the big leagues, you really need one of these things, an XY scanner set, galvos, galvanometers. And this is where it really starts to get pretty sophisticated in terms of the effects. Where you're talking about tracing out logos and designs, precise deflection and placement of the beam requires a pair of XY scanners. These XY scanners are closed loop. That means that they have feedback in them, so the galvo always knows its precise location, so you don't get overshoot. You can precisely steer that beam. And the way that they work, let's see if this video is going to play for me here. I tried it earlier. If you're not familiar exactly how these devices work, basically this is a good example of it here if I can't get the video to play, but you basically bounce the laser off of one mirror, right, which is rotating in the x-axis, to another mirror which is rotating in the y-axis, and basically now you have complete control of the beam in the XY axis. And basically what the computer does is it scans that pattern over and over again so rapidly that your persistence of vision causes you to see a solid image, and that's how you can do complex logos and so on and so forth. Not terribly complex though, because you're still dealing with these mirrors. These mirrors have mass. The galvanometers, of course, are limited in terms of how fast they can move. It's a physical limitation of how fast you can move them. So basically, it's always about getting them as small as possible. I actually have my projector up here, which you can come up and take a look at a little bit later on. I have two very small galvanometers here with mirrors that are almost as thin as a piece of paper cardstock. Really, really thin. Yeah, really thin things. Really fragile. Every laserist ends up breaking their mirrors sooner or later, and they're about $40 a set to replace. So it really kind of sucks. I had another projector that I had here that I use for doing RGB lasers, which I have there, but both of those mirrors broke off in transit, so it kind of sucks. But we'll at least be able to have some fun with the one that I have the 445 diode set up in here. Lasers. So yeah, I got into them back in the 1990s. The 1990s were sort of the golden age of lasers. We started to see the price come down, okay? But prior to this, I guess up until the 1990s is when gas lasers were basically what you used for doing laser light displays. Helium neon lasers, and then their larger cousins were argon ion lasers and krypton ion lasers. And these devices were huge. I mean, they were huge. They consumed a lot of power just to get a couple of milliwatts or watts out of them. Horribly, horribly inefficient devices, but it was basically all we had access to back then. We started seeing frequency doubled KTP YAG lasers start to appear on the scene back around the mid-1990s. They put out these bright emerald green beams of light at 532 nanometers, which is right around the peak sensitivity of the human eye. Okay, so what would appear to be a 1 watt laser in an argon, the equivalent 1 watt laser in a frequency doubled YAG would appear to be about 3 or 4 watts. So it was much more brighter. We started seeing these things appearing on the surplus market all the time. They'd originally been used a lot of times for eye surgery, cataract removal, so these things started ending up on the surplus market, and I think you could get a 40 watt YAG laser, green frequency doubled YAG laser that was air-cooled for around 10 grand, which back then was a hell of a deal, and they started showing up. So you started seeing a lot of green lasers showing up on the scene back around the mid-1990s. I never got a chance to see it. Las Vegas went laser crazy for a few years there back in the late 1990s, and the Sphinx over at the Luxor Hotel, they actually installed a pair of 40 watt YAG lasers into the eyes of the Sphinx, and they just basically shot the beams out, and the beams terminated on a mountainside about 40 miles away. So if you can imagine this, I never got a chance to see it, but you're driving into Las Vegas, you see Las Vegas off in the distance, and here are these 2 green beams cutting through the night, directing you to the Luxor. It was incredible from what I'm told. I never got a chance to see it. By the time I finally made it out to DEF CON, which I think was about 2000, the FAA had shut them down. Shut down all the outdoors, because everybody was doing it. All these casinos have their outdoor laser displays going on. And of course, there's a major airport, international airport, right there downtown Las Vegas. Now, the problem isn't so much, that kind of brings me to the safety issue of talking about lasers for display purposes. We're going to talk about blindness from lasers. Blindness from lasers. Are your lasers going to permanently blind you? That isn't as much of a concern. Permanent blindness isn't really as much of a concern when you're dealing with an outdoor laser display, especially when you're dealing with distances of miles. Okay, because all lasers are prone to a distortion that we call divergence. Okay, the laser in theory goes in a straight line, an infinite straight line. Of course, it doesn't do that. The beam does spread out, and we call this divergence. Now, you can overcome divergence using some optics, which are called collimating optics. They basically expand the beam initially, and then they kind of focus it back onto itself. You can overcome your divergence to a degree. All laser diodes, by the way, are prone to this. You have to use collimating optics on a laser diode. That's what that little lens is that screws on the end of a laser diode is for. But this is an aberration, I guess you would call it, that all lasers exhibit, is you're going to get some divergence. And by the time you're talking about a beam, that might be maybe a centimeter square in diameter when it exits the laser head, by the time it terminates a mile away, that beam spot could be five feet wide or more, right? Okay, so you're talking about blindness issues. You're talking about basically the CDRH measures the intensity of a laser in a 1 square centimeter area, which is about the same size as your pupil fully dilated in a darkened room. That's basically the metric that they use. And so you can imagine you have a 40 watt beam, right? A 40 watt beam that's 5 feet wide. How much power is actually going to reach your eye, the back of your eye, if it's only a cubic centimeter of that circle, of that space, right? So it's not a whole lot. In terms of permanent blindness, isn't really the issue. But if you're an aircraft pilot and you're on final approach, and all of a sudden, right, you're in a darkened cockpit, all of a sudden, this light sweeps through there and it flash blinds you on final approach, that's a bad thing, right? And I completely agree with the pilots. You know, they're responsible for a lot of lives, hundreds of people who are on board the aircraft, you know, hundreds, thousands of people who are on the ground. There are a lot of lives, a lot of responsibility that goes into the hands of a pilot. And when they are on final approach, they have to have their mind has to be concentrated on what they are doing. They don't need any distractions. So yeah, the FAA kind of shut them down in Vegas after a couple of years of the insanity, and Vegas went dark. That light you see on top of the Luxor over there, that's not a laser. That's just a floodlight, which ironically is, I guess, okay, right? For whatever reason, the government is afraid of coherent light, right? Coherent light bad, but as long as it's an incoherent, highly focused source, I guess that's okay. Yeah, they turned out the Sphinx. I never got a chance to see it, which is really kind of a bummer. I really wish I'd had a chance to do that. Lasers at Freaknik, yeah. All right, that's me circa 1999 or 2000, I can't remember which. Yes, I was much younger, much less gray back then. And that's me playing with my first argon ion laser. It was an American 60X model argon laser, air-cooled. You can see it's still a pretty hefty design there. It's a pretty big device. The gold box on the surface up there. That is the laser head, and you can see I have a gigantic 300 cubic foot per minute pancake fan on there to cool the thing off. Underneath that, on the bottom shelf there, that thing with the orange light on it, that's the power supply, supplying power to it. You could run these devices off of 110 volt outlet. I think it pulled probably about 10 amps, so yeah, about a kilowatt of power, and your output for the laser was rated, I think, at about 125 milliwatts. So yeah, you're dealing with a device that is horribly inefficient. Yeah, about 1,000 watts to get roughly about not even a tenth of watt out, or roughly about a tenth of a watt out. So really inefficient devices. Really nice color. It was a bluish green beam, several wavelengths combined together to get that nice emerald blue beam, and those were the mainstay of the laser light show industry for probably a good 30 years. But this was an air-cooled model. I always worked with air-cooled ion lasers myself, just because once you start getting into multi-watt devices beyond about maybe 3 or 4 watts in power, you start dealing with having to work with 3-phase power. You are dealing with water cooling, where you have to supply these things with about 5 gallons of water per minute to keep them cool, which just, of course, okay, you've got high voltage, you've got lots of amperage, and you've got water involved. Scary, right? It really was kind of scary to work with these things, so I really wanted to avoid a lot of that hassle. And I traditionally always worked, when I purchased ion lasers, I was always working with air-cooled devices. And this was a picture of the American 68B that I had. I nicknamed her Big Bertha. That's actually not the same laser that I had. I tried to find an American 68B on Google, and that was the best picture I could find. You know, they say that the internet is forever. Not really. Some old technology that's out there. I thought I'd find tons of photos of the old 68B online, and I just I did a Google Images search, and that was the best I could come up with. Kind of reminiscent of what the device is that I had, and it was capable of putting out. Was rated, I think, at 2 watts, and you could briefly crank the power up on the thing up to, you might be able to get about 4 or 5 watts out of it momentarily for about 30 seconds before the thermal switch would kick in and shut it down. It was air-cooled. I had 2 gigantic 300 cubic feet per minute squirrel cage blowers on it to keep the head cool. Required 220 single-phase power. It wasn't 3-phase, it was single-phase, 220. But it pulled 220 at about, I think, what was it, about 40 amps. So do the math there. That's about 10,000 watts of power. 10,000 watts of power for about 2 watts out. Okay? That's really crappy efficiency. Yeah? Oh, I think something on the order of what would that be, about 99.99% inefficient, right? Most of your power is being consumed and being dispensed as heat. I likened using an argon laser. Imagine if you were to go over to your stove burner, turn all 4 burners on until they glow orange hot on high, and then use that as a reading lamp. Okay, that's about how efficient it was. Most of your energy is being expended as heat going up into the air, and so they were just really, really inefficient devices. But again, back then, it was all we had to work with, right? Well, Big Bertha died a fiery death at this very conference. I think it was about 2004, and that was a VBD for me. A very bad day. Alanka remembers it. Some of the other folks, old-timers here at Freaknik, remember it as well. Basically, in a nutshell, what happened was it had two airports where it would cool. Ports where the air would come in for the air cooling on the tube. If this is the laser tube here, there was a port up towards the front that a squirrel cage fan hooked onto, and then there was one at the back here, okay? And then the air would kind of go through and come up and out the exhaust fan at the top, okay? The tube, this is a thermal cutoff switch right here, okay? It's on this end. Unfortunately, they didn't have one in series on this end of the tube. And that end of the tube is where the hose cooling it off fell off. It was fate, basically. It could have gone one way or the other, and it just so happened to be on the end of the tube where the thermal cutoff switch was not installed. Now, why they didn't ever think to install one on that end of the tube, I don't know. Hindsight's 20/20, I guess. They never figured something like this would happen. But basically, my laser show was going great here at Freaknik. Everything was awesome, going really cool. And then all of a sudden, somebody noticed that there was some smoke in the air. I think initially the reaction was, oh, it's just Laughing Boy's fog machine. Yeah, no, that doesn't smell like the fog machine. And somebody at some point said to me, they said, Laughing Boy, I think your laser's on fire. And I got up, went over to investigate, and sure enough, one of the fans, one of the air hoses had come off, and flames were billowing out from inside the thing. Cut the power. To make a long story short, the laser blinked out, boop, 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 and never came back on. So that was a really, really bad day for me. I had sunk about $6,000 into that thing, was really wanting to start doing raves and that sort of thing. And doing trying to make money with the thing. That never really panned out for me. And then to add insult to injury, the next day, the computer that I had with a $1,500 controller card that controls the software, steers the galvos, somebody decided that they needed that better than I did, and that went missing. So yeah, that was a very, very bad day for me at Freaknik. Bad night, I should say, and I proceeded to self-medicate. Went down to the liquor store, got a bottle of Jägermeister, and basically just drove my woes away. Let me explain something to you, especially to the youngsters here. If you decide to self-medicate at a conference like this, do not pass out in the con room. That's not me, but that's what happened. Okay, they did the stacking game on me. But Laughing Boy fell asleep, passed out in a chair like this. And word got around the con very quickly, hey, Laughing Boy's passed out in the con room, let's stack on him. And basically they use your body as a table for a twisted form of Jenga, right? They stack stuff on you, and then if you move or anything, the person who was stacking on you at that point loses the turn, loses the game, whatever. Yeah, bad night for me. All around, they drew on me with Sharpie. Again, that's not me. And again, like I said, fortunately, I did a search for those images out there. I can't find them out there anymore. I'm sure they still exist, right?
Yeah, we can find it.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. That's okay. Some things are better left unremembered. They're probably out there somewhere. But that was a very bad day for me, very bad night. And oh crap! Yeah. Shit, man. Email that to me, and I'll put it up here. So it was a sad day. It was a sad day. So basically what happens to me, I'm out. I got about roughly about $9,000 sunk into this out of my own personal income. I got a small business loan. I am out. I looked into having that laser head repaired. That was going to end up costing like $3,000. At that point, I was like, what am I going to do? I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait. I'm gonna wait a few years and let the prices come down because I knew that what was going on. We were starting to see the ion lasers being phased out, gas lasers were being phased out, and solid state laser diodes were starting to become more and more mature. And what a difference a decade makes. We have started to see prices go down, and we have started to see power levels go up. And thank you, China. Thank you to our friends in China. They have started mass producing laser diodes, and you can get things now for ridiculously low prices. The cost of entry into it has come way down, and this kind of harkens back to when I first got into doing laser displays in the early 1990s. To really be in the big leagues, to be able to do like concert stadium size shows, you were talking about lasers that cost tens of thousands of dollars. You were talking about support crew to set these things up, install them, run them, operate them. And so the cost of entry was very high. And I worked for some of these companies. I tried my best to kind of work my way into that business model, and it never really worked out. And now we're in a situation where the cost of entry is basically gone away. For a couple of $100s, you can go on eBay, you can buy a cheap, inexpensive laser projector from China, and you can start doing this. So basically, it's a classic case of supply and demand. The supply is higher, the demand is lower. So now laser light shows are no longer the cool, high-tech, woo, gee whiz thing that they once were, say 25, 30 years ago. Now everybody's doing lasers. And I think lasers have kind of lost their luster, to pardon the pun there. They've lost a little bit of their impact in terms of being used in popular medium, but they have actually still stuck around, and we've started to see just amazing power levels here. The laser that I have there, this laser diode, is capable of putting out 6 watts. 6 watts, and I can hold it in my hand. Instead of requiring enough electrons to power an entire city block, it consumes about maybe 100 watts and is capable of putting out about 6. So still in terms of efficiency, that's really lousy, okay? That's a 6% efficiency, roughly, give or take, but it's way better than it used to be, right? Now I have a device that I can carry in one hand. I can plug into a wall outlet. I don't need water cooling. I don't need these gigantic loud fans to blow down. It doesn't weigh hundreds of pounds. It's basically kind of like the technology. When technology went from vacuum tubes to transistors is basically what it's sort of like, the analogy that I would use for it. And we have started to see prices come down, and now you can for just a very reasonable price, a couple of $100, you can be in possession of a class 4 laser that is putting out multi-watts. Pardon the pun, pardon me quoting the cheesy line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. This is a bit of a problem now, because we have these devices that are technically regulated, okay? They're regulated by the federal government. It's a branch of the FDA called the CDRH, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Basically what they do, they govern nuclear reactors, X-ray machines, microwave ovens. Lasers for laser light displays are a very small branch of what they do, but they do actually oversee this. And because they are a radiological device, they are governed by the federal government. And we have a situation now where there is a flood of these high-powered devices that have made their way into the United States, via China. Even though they are technically regulated, they're sold as components. And because they're sold as components, they kind of fall into this gray area where it is regulated, but it's not. So it can kind of slip in under the radar. And now we have these devices where people are making these basically laser pointers from hell, okay, is what I would call it. There's a company called Wicked Lasers, and they create these laser pointers that are capable of putting out, multi-watts. This is a class 4 device in a handheld device, okay? Now, the problem with this is, what does that thing look like? A lightsaber, right? You get a lightsaber in your hand, what's your instinct to do? So you're swinging willy-nilly a class 4 laser, pulling out multi-watts around like this. You hand it off to your buddy, right? Unlike the lightsabers out of fantasy, the beam does not terminate after 3 feet. It keeps going, right? And so you run into a situation where, once again, not so much of a problem, I think, of permanent blindness, but flash blindness. You can burn with these things, right? That's one of the tricks that these guys do with them. You know, they use them to light a cigarette. I think it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, yeah, they're cool looking, but for what purpose? You know, what purpose? And my problem with them is that because it is so prone to be treated like a toy, people are idiots. Right? People are idiots. They get these things into their hands. They don't know how to use them responsibly. And my fear is that there's going to be a rash of instances where these devices have caused problems, and basically the federal government steps in and says, that is it, right? No more lasers. You're not allowed to have these devices anymore. And that's going to get to, we're going to get into that situation. So I'm very, very concerned about that. If you do own one of these things, don't be an asshat with it, okay? Your instinct is to take it outside, is to take it up and shine it up into the sky. I don't think that's so much of a problem. Keep them off of low-flying aircraft, okay? This is a big problem. I see this on my Google laser feed, news feed all the time. Every other story that comes through is where they're arresting somebody for illuminating a helicopter or an aircraft with these things, okay? The FAA is not screwing around where lasers are concerned, folks. They're not screwing around. They will prosecute you, and it's going to be a case that I'm afraid of where one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. You know, basically somebody ruins it for everyone. So, you know, yeah, it's cool to point it up into the sky like that. It's technically illegal, okay? If you're going to do that, make sure there's no low-flying aircraft around. You're not going to get caught. You know, just be responsible with these things. If you're going to use them for that sort of thing, you know, better off to just keep them inside and you know, entertain yourself that way. But so that is a real problem with them that I foresee potentially. That we might see. Kind of you know, not really going into laser light displays. What's next for laser light displays? Not a whole lot. I think that laser light displays, as they are traditionally being done right now, have kind of petered out in terms of what technology is going to allow from them. Because once again, you've got this galvanometer that is moving a physical mirror. And your limitation is mass. You know, you can make a more efficient galvo. You can create a galvo that will scan a faster line, but I don't really think you're going to see any real big breakthrough that I foresee coming in laser light displays. But what else? What is on the horizon that you could potentially use a laser for? Well, this has actually been proposed for a number of years. Is putting a gigantic solar array out in orbit around the Earth. Basically a gigantic solar collector. You collect solar energy 24/7. You're not having to deal with cloud cover. You're not having to deal with being in the shadow of night. Basically, you have a gigantic solar array that is in orbit around the Earth, collecting solar energy, and basically beams it back to Earth as a beam, as a laser, or probably a maser in this instance. A maser would probably be even more convenient. And basically, you have collectors on the surface of the Earth, probably out at sea, where they're going to be away from anybody. They're not going to present a hazard to anyone near the on the surface, rather, where you can collect the energy at that point, focused down. You reconvert it into electricity using photovoltaics, and basically save the planet, right? Solve the energy crisis. Of course, something like that going to be very, very expensive. It's been something that's been proposed for a number of years, but it's viable, and I think that the technology exists. It's just we need the incentive to actually go ahead and do it. One of the things that I've always found very interesting about lasers is for optical media storage. Now you probably know this, understand the way that a DVD works, multi-layer DVD. Basically you have multiple layers on that disc, and the disc is only readable by the specific laser frequency that they used to write that layer. So you've got this the Blu-ray layer down here. The red beam passes through it and reads only the layers above that. You can do that infinitely, in theory. You could have a laser that is basically tuned, frequency tuned, and you could stack multiple layers. You know, I don't see why you would have to stop with 3 layers. You could do 100. You might do 1,000, 1,000,000. Who knows? You know, what the theoretical limitation is. But I've always found that kind of fascinating. Is that that particular layer, in theory, is only readable by that particular wavelength of light. And of course, you're talking about a laser. You have trillions of discrete wavelengths that you could select from. So, in theory, again, you could create an optical disc that basically has an infinite amount of storage on it, which is kind of cool. Also using for fiber optics, you know, you modulate, you feed a fiber optic cable not with a single wavelength. You pump it with multiple wavelengths, and now you've got basically infinite bandwidth that you could pass through an optical fiber. You know, basically on the same premise of that. So, really neat, nifty little devices. I have a lot of fun playing around with them. But I'm sure you all came here to see this. Yeah, this is actually what I've been working on for the last couple of months. Actually, about the last year or so. I got off to a slow start. I told you I was out of doing laser displays for a number of years, and then I got a couple of these laser projectors off of eBay. Cheap Chinese laser projectors. I think something on the order of about 1 watt of RGB, red, green, and blue combined. So you get a white beam out, maximum power outage of about 1 watt. But I'm a hacker, so of course I can't just leave well enough alone. I've got to be able to do stuff with it, right? I've got to be able to modify it. And I acquired the NUBM44 laser diode, which is right here. In this, I've actually got it just mounted temporarily in a pipe clamp here. It's basically it's sitting in a copper heat sink with its lens on the end, and the beam is coming out onto the XY scanners here. Its driver is a little tiny circuit board here. It's about the size of a large postage stamp, in contrast to the gigantic 200-pound power supply that I used to have to deal with. Now, you know, basically you feed it with 12 volts from a regulated power supply, and that is your controller right there. And then the device itself, the laser, of course, mounted in the heat sink here. And then these are the electronics over here for steering the galvos, the XY galvos, and adjusting them, the power requirements for that. But the laser itself is really just 3 components: the 12-volt power supply, the driver board, which supplies the voltage to the laser diode. And that's probably the most important thing. Is a lot of laser diodes have died because people think, well, it's just a 5-volt device, I'm just going to feed it 5 volts. And there's a problem with that. A laser diode, as it consumes more energy, it starts to heat up. As it starts to heat up, it wants to consume more energy, okay? Basically, it gets into a runaway mode here. And if you do not have a current-limited power supply feeding that diode, you will fry your diode in no short order, very, very quickly. So it's absolutely imperative. You can't just hook it up to a pair of batteries and be done with it. They're very, very finicky in terms of their power requirements. They are electrostatic sensitive, so you need to practice ESD practices when you're handling them. But other than that, it's just absolutely amazing. This particular diode is capable of doing about 6 watts. 6 watts. 6 watts from something that I can hold in my hand. Yeah, wow, what a difference a few years makes. It just kind of blows me away in terms of the power levels that we have here, that we're dealing with. In fact, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and let's just adjust this, since I don't really have the galvos aimed really well. Let's go ahead and apply some power here to it right now. Okay. So there it is. Nice, ooh, pretty, right? Yeah, how much power is it putting out right now? I don't know exactly. I know that the driver board shipped when I bought it from the guy. It's supposed to be tuned to about 6 amps to get your maximum power outage out of it. He said you're going to need to do that yourself. He said it ships tuned to about 2 amps. So if we're going to say that the power outage on it is linear, right out of the box it was doing about 2 watts. I did tweak it a little bit. boost the power on it just a little bit, just to give a little bit more oomph. And I'm going to guess, just by staring at the intensity of the spot there, using my Mark I eyeball, it's about a 3-watt beam right now that you're looking at there, give or take. Don't want to adjust it any further without doing the proper calibration of the driver board, because I don't want to kill another one. Yeah. I fried one about a year or so ago when they were still about 180 bucks. And is it smoking? No, it's not. It's just me. It's really hard to burn a white surface with a laser like this. Yeah, you really need a opposite wavelength here, something red or black. But you know what? You all want to see me burn something, don't you?
Yes.
Okay. Let's try the cap on the marker here.
So we're wondering if we can dim the lights a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, huh? Yeah, go ahead, man. Dim lights up. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the smoke really helps.
Because it's yeah.
It ignores the Surgeon General's warning.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We're burning plastic here.
Please don't burn the ceiling fan.
Okay, go. You know what?
Hey, your
I
shirt's
know.
got black on it.
Yeah, my shirt's got black. Yeah. I was twigging the thing, and it was actually burning stuff on the kitchen table. It was like, my wife didn't see that, thankfully. She'd have killed me. I know I'm not supposed to have a fog machine here, but
Tell you.
just a little bit, just to get a little bit of
Yes.
atmosphere in there. Yeah, I promise I'm not going to stop the fire alarm. We'll stop right there. Just to kind of show you the intensity of the beam, how pretty and blue it is. What's that? Oh, the chandelier? Have you all signed a waiver? Yeah, the chandelier is going to be fun, I can tell you right now, because of the diffraction.
That's what I want.
All right. Okay. Oh, dear God. Oh, let's see. There we go. Pretty. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, the old school laserium out in LA. Used to be at the big observatories out there. They used to run laser shows since like back in the early 70s. And they would send one of their guys around. He would literally go around town, and they would say, just go and find like something distorted, get like a crystal out of a chandelier. It would basically go on buying runs to find like glass that they could use to diffract, to make different effects with the beams. So yeah, it's really pretty. It's really pretty. Whoops. It just
Did you shine 2 lasers into the chandelier?
So there you can see the intensity of it. Yeah, like I said, it's doing about 3 watts or so. Like I said, watch how quickly we put this into the beam, and then it starts to smolder. Yeah. So it's amazing.
Is it less powerful?
Yes, absolutely. You know, and that is one of the things that the CDRH does look at. You know, if you're scanning the beam very quickly, you can take for example, you could take a 40-watt beam. You could take a 40-watt laser beam, and you could scan it fast enough that it would be within the legal limits of what the CDRH is, which I think is. Lower than 5 milliwatts per centimeter squared is what it has to be. The average power has to be lower than 5 milliwatts per centimeter squared, average power. And of course, yeah, you can scan a laser beam fast enough and achieve that kind of power, but the CDRH, it's a 4-letter government agency, CDRH. Right, the government wants everything taken into consideration, right? How fast is it scanning? What's its amplitude? What's its angle? What's its wavelength, right? They want to know what color underwear you're wearing, pretty much. They want to, I'm just kidding about that. No, but they really do. They want all the variables taken into consideration. And so, yes, technically, in this country, audience scanning of a laser beam, for a laser show has been regulated and wasn't really something that you could do. And now in Europe, it's a completely different story. You know, as long as the beam is moving, Europeans, they don't really care much about it. The reason that lasers started getting regulated in this country for laser displays started back in the 1970s with a band called the Blue Oyster Cult. Yes. They had one of their band members was on stage, and he thought, how cool would it be? Okay, they've got these multi-watt argon lasers on their stage. How cool would it be to just tape a mirror to the back of my guitar and during a guitar solo, sit there and deflect the beam around through the audience? Yeah, and people like literally had permanent eye damage, right? Because they were taking that laser, that beam straight on, and that's when the CDRH stepped in and said, yeah, we're going to reel this in. We haven't really had any incidents like that since then, but that's what really concerns me with these laser pointers. And you know, the overly powerful beams that you can get now in a handheld device. I mean, this is just, you guys just, I can't understand. I'm looking at this here, and I can't get over how things have changed. How I have this kind of power level, and this thing isn't even doing half of what it's capable of doing. It's just, it's really cool. And yeah, that diode, even if I were to kill it, was I think it was about $90.
Does it have self-defense applications?
Does it have self-defense applications? Well, yes, yeah, you might be able to use, you might be able to burn your adversary in the eye right when they're chasing you. Use your, these are showing up right now on eBay right now because they are pulls. This is a pull from a laser video projector system. They're using laser diodes now for for video projectors now.
Is it worth pulling a Blu-ray apart?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's really worth it so much. You can find Blu-ray diodes. Oh yeah, you can get. There's the guy I bought this from. He has 900 milliwatt Blu-ray, which is 405 nanometers, which is a really nice purple color. And by the way, you pass it over anything that glows in the dark, and it leaves a trail. It's really wicked. Cool. Yeah, really cool. They will phosphorize anything. You can get a 900 milliwatt Blu-ray diode mounted with optics, and then all you need is a driver for it.
So China?
What's that?
Just Alibaba?
No, not eBay. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. If you see me at the end of the show, I'll show you his eBay store who I bought this from. Really nice guy, really helpful in terms of what you do. But yeah, the Blu-ray diodes are awesome. They are really pretty. 405 nanometers, so that's UV, you know, long wave UV. Really pretty. We've started to see different wavelengths of green come out, different wavelengths of blue. This is right now running, I think, 445 nanometers. We've started to see 460 nanometers, got 520 nanometers of green, of course 532 green, KTP frequency doubled. And yeah, basically, you know, so you get a RGB array. You have three diodes. You have a blue one, green, and a red. You combine them together using dichroic filters. Basically, you fold the beam on top of it, and you focus them all together. In fact, that's what I have here. It's not operating right now, but this is three different diodes, green RGB. Combines all three beams together using these optics, and you get a white beam out. And then, of course, by modulating the intensity of either, you know, any of these the individual diodes, by modulating the intensity of them, you have basically an unlimited array of different frequencies. You can basically dial in any color of light that you want with them. So, I mean, that's a big deal right there in and of itself. When we were doing with ion lasers, it was, you know, you had beam combining optics like that as well, but you had to modulate it using another device, which was a pain in the ass to set up, something called an acousto-optomodulator. And so now the diodes themselves, you just modulate them directly. You just vary the amount of current that's going to the diode itself, so you don't get that loss of passing it through an OEM or I'm sorry, AOM, and having to tweak and adjust that device. So Yeah, lasers have just become a whole lot easier to work with, but again, with great power comes great responsibility. So, if you're interested in doing this sort of thing, I definitely recommend you get yourself into it. Just do so responsibly. Don't do anything, really crazy with them. Be respectful of them, but it's pretty cool. Any questions? Yes. Yes.
I remember a couple of years ago I was reading there was one of the colors either blue or green. There was some serious concern about like unintentional wavelengths coming off that cause eye damage. Is that still a thing?
Yeah. Not so much with the diodes. The diodes are pretty much all single frequency, except in the instance of a green laser pointer or green diode. Green lasers that are operating at 532 nanometers. Basically, that's a frequency doubled laser. I think the pump laser that you use for a green pointer like that is at 808 nanometers, which is infrared. It's shortwave infrared, but you're not going to see it with your eyes. And basically what ends up happening is they pass that through a frequency doubling crystal is what they call it. So they basically, they raise it up to, it's kind of weird. They take it from 808 nanometers, they pump a crystal that lasers at 1064 nanometers, and then they cut that frequency in half, they bring it down to 532, and that's where you get that bright emerald green. Okay, so if you've got a 5 milliwatt laser pointer, you're probably pumping that thing with a watt of power, 1 watt of power. There's a 1 watt, 808 nanometer laser diode at the back of that thing that's pumping that. Now they can put optics in there. They can put filters in there. You're supposed to filter out those infrared frequencies. You don't need them. You're supposed to be filtered out. Some of the cheaper devices that come out of China, to save a few bucks here and there, they don't always put that infrared filter in there. So yes, you're not just dealing with green wavelengths. Now you've also got infrared, which of course you can't see. So the laser beam is there, but you don't even realize it. So what looks like a 5 milliwatt laser could be a lot more power coming out of it if they don't have those filters installed in there in front of the diodes. So very good point. This device here, single frequency, 445 nanometers. Most of the new lasers that are being developed now, most of the diodes that are coming out now are single frequency, but you still do have those frequency doubled devices that are still out there as well, and that is definitely a cause of consideration, and concern. Good point, yes.
Is there something to look at to avoid those when you're buying labeled or?
No, and not unless you take it apart. Not unless you take it apart and you go to see if the IR filter is in place. And most of the time, if you're dealing with a diode, everything's sealed up anyway. You're not gonna disassemble that thing without getting out the Dremel and cutting into it, so you won't even know. The only thing you could do, well, you could if you had I guess you could measure the frequency of light coming out of it. If you had a spectral analyzer, you could do it that way. But of course, those are very expensive devices. I would stay, if that was a cause of concern, I would stay away from 532 nanometer devices. I would go for 520 nanometer. That's a discrete diode that puts out that frequency of green and only that frequency of green. Very good point, though.
Oh, yeah.
And what else? What else? Oh, okay. Well, folks, I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be hosting. We're going to be doing a little something fun here in our room tonight. Room 242, about 10 o'clock-ish, give or take. We're going to watch Tron Legacy, the drinking game. The rules are very simple. Anytime you hear a song by Daft Punk, you take a drink, which means we should be hammered about 15 minutes in, right? So, yeah, we'll have the laser up there in the room, and we'll augment the movie with a little bit of laser light. I don't know, maybe they'll let us borrow one of the projectors or something, take it up there, or we could do it in the con room here or something. But yeah, I didn't see anything on the plans here for later tonight. So look for the room with the bright blue flashes coming out of it. Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, wow. All right. Well, I think that covers it pretty much. And I'm gonna. Do I have anybody else coming in after me here?
Lighting talks.
Okay. Okay, and that's at what, 10? It's now. Oh, crap. I'm sorry. My bad. All right. Let me get out of your way here, guys. And thank Thank you. Thank you, guys. Rock on.